I think there's been an obvious tonal shift between the seasons of Taz. This video is my attempt to explain that. Also, this video is not an attack of Travis's season, Graduation, so if you're here for that, you're gonna be disappointed. Also, this video is gonna have spoilers for Adventure Zone Balance, so bear that in mind. With all that gotten out of the way, let's get on with the video. I actually think the tonal shift in the Adventure Zone happened during the last arc of the Balance campaign, but was only clear once Season 2, Amnesty, started. Before I get into that, though, I want to explain the history of Taz, so we have some context to work with. Taz, or The Adventure Zone, started as a one-episode released on the McElroy Brothers Comedy Advice podcast. It was a collaboration between the three brothers McElroy and their dad, Clint McElroy. This episode was so popular that the McElboys and father decided to continue the campaign as a separate podcast. They christened it The Adventure Zone, and thus a wildly popular RPG podcast and graphic novel series, and possibly a TV show, was born. The initial attraction of Taz is easy to see. The boys were used to do comedy. They'd been doing My Brother and Me for years, and their father had been doing radio for about 40 years. I'm bad at math, but I'm pretty sure it was close. The point is, they had experience in making jokes, and up to the last episode of their third arc and their first campaign, Taz had a strong focus on comedy over narrative. This isn't to say there wasn't any story in the early arcs of Taz. Murder on the Rockport Limited is my favorite Balance arc because of its plot and the way the PCs interact with it. But we can see the differences in the approach to Taz when the goal is comedy rather than story. Justin McElroy, in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, said, "It started out as an improvisational comedy podcast, and there were a lot of times that we'd compromise the story because we didn't care about moving the story forward, and we didn't have any idea about what the podcast would become." Now, this is my handy-dandy Taz-focused timeline that I've made up completely after listening to the entire podcast twice. Side note, that's almost 7 days of my life spent listening to Taz, not even including Season 2 and the mini-arcs. Anyways, as you can see, I've put the first 3 arcs of Balance in the comedy section of the chart. These arcs are the most obviously comedic part of the show. Griffin was obviously putting effort in as far as the story goes. So much effort, oh my gosh. But it hadn't really reached a point yet where it was less improv comedy and more cooperative storytelling. I was a little iffy putting Pedals to the Metal slowly in the comedy section of this chart, but since most of the narrative weight is on the back end of the arc, I think it's still more comedy focused than narrative. The next 2 arcs are a healthy balance, of both. Most of the comedy here, in the Crystal Kingdom and the 11th Hour, is balanced, by the players realizing what the PCs do now has narrative weight. These arcs have more narrative than other arcs. We see this in Griffin narrating story blocks that the PCs have no way of knowing for the benefit of the audience. We also see less of a focus on comedy, and in part that's because it would be really jarring to hear Trace horny voice making boner jokes while the hunger is destroying entire planner system. But these are just my thoughts on the overarching tonal shift. If you don't agree with me or just want to share your thoughts, why not leave a comment? I don't have a life, so I'll probably respond. Also, I couldn't find a place for this in the script, but if you're looking for a D&D actual play podcast that will remind you of the early seasons of Balance while hitting hard with emotions in some spots, I'd recommend Rude Tales of Magic. They're only about 20 episodes into the campaign, and they're doing a mini-series until the US is opened back up and they can do the main campaign in person. I really enjoy it, and it deserves more listens. Anyways, with that all said, I've been Lee, you guys have been awesome, and I'll see you next time.